What is going on, everyone? AP over here at Run Pure Sports, bringing to you once again each and every week the Lineup Builder Show with our partner Sabersim. We have Jordan from Sabersim on with us as we always do. Jordan, how is it going today, my man?
It's good, man. We got the first full field with a cut golf tournament of the year here coming up in like an hour. So good opportunity for us to talk a little bit of golf strategy here today. I'm super excited about it, ready to get into it here. Just another week, man. Let's go.
Yeah, I know. I'm used to doing like NBA, like up to lock stuff. Like we got actually NBA up to lock. I got that tonight with JSU. But we got PGA up to lock today. So kind of fun. It's going to be, great to go through this. I think what we do is we start at a high level like we always do. And then I think towards the end of the show, as we get closer to lock, we're going to take everyone through kind of what I did this week as well. So excited to get into that. We got the Sony Open this week. I mean, all right, Jordan. So I have a question for you. And this is, I picked this up just watching the video that you guys created over at Sabersim, walking through all the changes and enhancements that you've made to the sims, the projections, the ownership, or whatever. Mm-hmm. This week we have an event where it's going to be scoring is going to be relatively easy. Mm-hmm. We have a field that like Tom Kim, a guy that if you know PGA DFS, you know who Joe Young Kim is, Tom Kim. But I mean, if you're your average person, this is an up and coming guy that doesn't have a household name. So surprising to see up top. And so ownership is going to be very interesting. But my question is, when we get to tracks that are easy scoring environments, what's your take? Is it better for the golfers that are very good, the elites, or is it better for the more average golfers? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I was talking about this with our team, the guys that built the golf model here. I know you and I were going back and forth in DMs earlier this week. I think it's an interesting discussion. The intuitive argument kind of makes sense either way for me. My gut feeling here is that an easier course is going to increase the spread between the best golfers and the worst golfers in the field, make the scoring a little bit more reliable. I think it's going to increase the variance of a contest when you have those tougher courses. I think especially, if we're talking about a typical event with a cut, that's the main thing that comes to my mind here is, it's when the best golfer in the field is a little bit closer to average just to get on to the weekend. That has such a big impact on that golfer's optimal rate, their ability to really put up a big score, that I think it increases the variance there. So easier course this week, as you mentioned, I would say it makes me feel like this is going to be a little bit of a lower variance event. I think I'd be a little bit more inclined to play a little more chalk, maybe potentially have more of a defined player pool or be a little bit more concentrated there. But I know we've been going back and forth on this all week. I've been talking about it with our guys as well. And I don't know. I'm a little undecided there. I think it's a really interesting discussion point there.
I almost compare it like an analogy, and maybe this is a bad analogy, maybe it's a good one, but like NBA DFS, since that's like what I am in. Yeah, I'm in there every single day in the streets battling. And when we get days where you get players ruled out, there's some obvious value chalk that you just eat. Those days I describe as easier to cash. Like easier to get into the green, tougher to win. Tougher to win because you're battling against more people who have those best plays also versus where you get a slate where there isn't a lot of obvious value. It takes, it takes a little bit more digging to find the good plays, make some stands. Maybe those are easier to win, tougher to cash type slates. So I don't know if there's any similarity there. Like if we had John Rahm in the field this week, I think we would all be high, all in on John Rahm. But what if it was a Justin Thomas who didn't look as good last week? And so there's so many different variables, and I'm with you. I think you can argue it either way, and it's tough to it's tough to truly formulate like an argument that is like certainly for one way or the other. My stance is whenever we get an easier field, I do think there's more variance, more volatility. And I like to embrace that. And I think you can do a good job, an easy job of that using Sabersim. So Let's get into it though, because we could
Yeah.
talk about that for a long time. Let's run through a base build. We will get to kind of what I did. I'll walk you through basically all the stuff that I did this week using the heat map and everything. But let me kick it back over to you. Let's go through a base build and explain to the people what that is and what we're doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, real quick, right off the bat, I do want to stress that what we're doing behind the scenes here is we're running simulations out for this tournament, right? So, I mean, when you hit the app for the first time, you see a projection, an ownership projection, a lot of things that'll probably look familiar. But what's actually going on behind the scenes, we're not just generating ownership projections and calling it a day, right? We're actually simulating out this tournament and coming up with all of the different outcomes for the way that this can play out. And you can see clicking into a golfer's name here, it's a pretty strange distribution. There's actually not a lot of sports that look like this, and it's generally because of the cut, right? Corey Connors projected, a hair over 78 points, but he's actually kind of got these two different split outcomes, right? He misses the cut, and there's a range of outcomes of what happens there. And then you have the making the cut and kind of the most common average performance for Corey Connors. And then also the tail of ceiling outcomes here where he's going top 5 or winning this thing, right? And that's the same for most of the other golfers in the field. And I mean, even a guy like Tom Kim, highest salary golfer in the field, highest projection, right? We can scroll over here to the right, and these are really cool. I definitely want to touch on these a little bit here. Missing the cut 14% of the time, right? Doesn't even play into the weekend here, which, I mean, you play DFS for long enough, you know that a 14% chance of something happening actually, is going to come to fruition pretty often. So I think it's really important to stress that all of this data here over on the right, including these percentages, comes from the Sims here. So I think there's some really cool research you can do looking into these, trying to see what guys have a little bit more upside, even across different salary bands or ownership percentages, like how often is somebody going to win? How often are they going to top 5 here? The last thing I want to touch on before we just jump into a build is the ownership projections. The models team at Sabersim has really been working hard on this for the past 6 weeks. The ownership projections for golf have come a really long way. I mentioned last year we were talking a little bit about ownership, that what we did was really an algorithmic model. And sometimes it would kind of miss narratives. It would miss, situations where maybe a guy was getting steamed up. We've built in a manual review process as well now, where we have kind of a team on our end that's checking these, adjusting throughout the week, making sure we're tracking this. No ownership model is ever going to be perfect, right? We're going to miss situations, things like that are going to happen, but it really has come a long way. So if you checked us out last year, had some problems with the ownership, understandably so, check it out again. It's really come a long way. I'd love to hear feedback from anybody if you feel like we're missing certain spots or things like that. But the team has been working really hard on that. So we're pretty proud of the ownership this year.
Yeah, no, I think the ownership looks good. Like I see, so the my ownership, right? That's the column that we're looking at. So yeah, Sung Jae Im, Keith Mitchell, Brian Harmon, Corey Connors, Cam Davis. The Mackenzie Hughes one is definitely somewhat interesting. I have him as a fade, so I hope he's higher owned because I just don't like him here. Tom Kim, I think that the ownership definitely looks really good from what I can see for this week. Because it just seems like it's going, it does seem like there are going to be some chalk plays in the high. Keep in mind, the higher stakes up you go, these plays like the Brian Harmon, Corey Connors, Poston, they're going to be even higher owned. It's just what you see in those events. If you get down to like my favorite contest, the $5 150 max, you're going to see ownerships really start to spread out. You will see some consolidation on the guys that you guys have listed, though.
Yeah.
So I agree with where you guys have ownership at this week for sure.
And that's a good point. So these ownership projections are generally for a larger field GPP. So we're trying to, the $5 or even the $20, that's kind of what we're trying to project ownership for here. It will condense higher stakes, smaller fields. The top plays are going to get a lot more ownership there. And some of the kind of a lot of times this middle range of ownership drops quite a bit, because that ownership has to come from somewhere to boost some of these guys up. So
now there's one thing that I'm going to be looking for when we run this base build, and I've already ran it. Maybe it'll be different though, because I ran it yesterday. But comparing it to last week, Rom, you guys, your projections were very high on. Ours were also And when I ran that, I was getting like 85, 90% wrong, which was no cut event. Obviously ended up being the right play for sure. But my suspicion for this week is we're going to see ownership spread out. And that is definitely aligns with what we see at easier scoring events. It's just more volatility. Ownership the play should. Like our top projected guy, I would think, with the projections that we have, would come in somewhere between 25, maybe 30%. Is kind of what I was thinking. So it's going to be interesting when we run this and what we get.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the base build, I think we should run a cash one.
Okay. I haven't ran the cash one yet. So I ran setting the GPP settings to 10 and to 7 or 10, and ownership fade 0, and I ran 150 is what I did.
Yeah. I think we should start here. I think this is just interesting. Yeah. So what the cash build is going to do, it's basically going to turn the sims off, and it's just going to use the average projections as they are and build the top 500 optimals here. The reason why I think this is interesting, I think it can especially help when you're kind of digging into ownership, right? This is basically how the field is going to be building their lineups, right? With other tools out there, other optimizers, average projections. So it's going to boost up the guys that point per dollar grade out pretty well. It's going to drop guys that maybe have a little bit higher upside, but maybe they're a little bit higher salary, don't grade out that well. You can just get an idea of like where ownership might fall here. And I just think this is kind of interesting. Sometimes it can show you, maybe situations where a guy might be under projected on ownership a little bit. Like if a guy like Harris English here, 7-8, is showing up in 50% of the top optimals, at least with our projection, 7.1 might actually be a little bit low, especially in the larger field stuff here. So it can give you an idea, just grade it out on pure average projections on where things are going. You see Poston here, also 95%, right? Like I could see him being a very popular play here, maybe even coming over that 20% mark at 7.7. So I just like to use this here to get an idea of where the field's going. Anytime our sim diversity slider is really cranked up when we're building our GPP lineups, I think it's valuable to run this cash lineup first just to see what the optimals look like.
Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting. So I didn't run a cash settings build. I ran the GPP settings build, and I got a different distribution range when you're looking at the players. Really interesting, Matt Kuchar. He's like a course history guy here. Harris English, he was injured last season, so we didn't get a lot of him. But once he gets that old form back, he's going to be a guy that will really pop. So it makes sense that in the cash setting type of build that we're getting Poston, Kim, Mac Hughes, Harris English. What if we run? So let's do I use 7 or 10. I can't remember what I used, but we can do either.
Honestly, I like 9.
All right.
If you're down to run 9, so basically, let's explain what these are real quick here. So the sim diversity slider is basically how many sims are we looking at to build each individual lineup, and at 10, it's going to be a single tournament simulation, which I think can be useful, but there is a ton of variance in just a single sim, right? We're trying to get an idea of, how often is a golfer showing up in the optimal lineup here. I think 9 basically is going to bucket a handful of sims together and group them together and then build an optimal lineup for that. I think it's a good starting point. I don't think there's anything wrong with 7 necessarily. I've been using 9 a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense for the research build here.
Well, one other thing too is when I think back to like last season, I've been doing this a long time now, but there are certain events where I just feel better about certain golfers at those events. It's just a gut feeling, just some sort of intuition there. Then there's other events where I feel far less confident. One thing that I've worked into my process going into this year is I'm adjusting the slider based on that. So I think there's going to be more variance this week. It's going to be a higher, more volatile week where we could have if you look at the previous winners here, short driving distance is not a separator at this event. We've seen short hitters do very well here, and it's a lot about finding fairways. It's a lot about then obviously your approach game and then making putts. So I think a lot more of the field, a wider range of the field is in play to win. Like you could go all the way down to like a Nick Taylor, who's 6'7", who's a shorter hitter, but he's a ball striker. I would not be surprised if he posted a top 10. So my point there is, when I ran my final stuff, I cranked that puppy up, and I'm trusting it, and I'm making a lot of the adjustments in step 3. And I love like the final result, like where I ended up this week. I absolutely love how I'm sitting. So we'll walk through that. But when I did run, you do get a wider range. Now I wasn't getting as much post-in love, and maybe that was maybe did the projections or something change?
Yeah. So
from the last few days.
I wouldn't say they nothing really happened that would have shaken things up significantly. I don't think we had any big withdrawals or anything like that, but we do update the sims throughout the week as odds are changing. So yeah, I mean, I think probably is in the betting markets. Boston here was getting bet up a little bit. And that's affected the way that the odds have moved, and his projection has increased accordingly here. So, yeah,
that's super sharp. I mean, so even if you don't know a lot about PGA DFS, you're in good hands knowing that, these things are getting adjusted up to lock. So Absolutely. That's really sharp.
And I like the take as well about making adjustments to that diversity slider based on your perception of how high variance the event is going to be. I think that's really sharp. If you're playing this, if you think this is a higher variance event, or even if you're just a little less sure of your convictions on a given slate, playing with a little bit of a higher sim diversity slider here makes a ton of sense. I would probably set like a floor of like 6 or 7 on that sim diversity for golf, and probably not go lower than that, just because at the end of the day, I mean, we talked about some of the best golfers here still having a real chance to miss the cut. It's a high variance game. It's a high variance sport. You definitely want this to be at kind of a baseline high level, but making adjustments there based on how you want to play that particular week, I think that makes a ton of sense.
So do we want to show people too so if there's like a weather edge or a weather advantage, how to easily plug that in?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is new this year as well. I know people were really asking for it a lot last year. We've got the tee times pulled into the app here now. This is in the local time of where the tournament's being played. I know we've already gotten some questions about that here. So very easy to create groups with the tee time here. We'll open up the lineup rules tab here, add a new rule. And then what we want to do is add a group here. So I know you get pretty aggressive with these in general. Do we have a weather edge this week? Is there any weather?
I'm going to look it up real quick. So keep talking,
okay.
And let me get the location.
So let's just say, for example, that maybe the edge is in the morning wave, just as a hypothetical here. We can say something like use at least 5 players, right? So we're only willing to play. Actually, we'll want to make an automatic rule here. So use at least 5 players, and then we're going to add the tee time as a stat requirement. So the tee time must be before, just say noon, for example. Oops, that's not noon.
I don't see much of an edge. So all right. So there are some wins this morning, but nothing that's going to really impact things for me. I always look for when you get to 20 mile an hour winds with like 25 mile an hour gusts or higher. And then as you continue to go up, like 25 sustained, 30 sustained, that's where the huge impacts are. But if you're talking 10, 15, even like 18, these guys are pros, man. I don't think the edge is that significant.
Yeah, and these Hawaii events, it feels like early in the year, it's hard to really get some bad weather down there.
The winds change in Hawaii all the time too. Like it's so I'm not assuming any type of weather advantage here.
Cool. Well, this is how you would do it here. I know as we get into the season a little bit more, we'll definitely have some events like this. We'll definitely have some showdowns like this too. So basically just set how many players you want from that particular wave. Let us know what wave you're looking at here. You can save this as a manual rule down here, and that's going to let you go in and look and kind of cross-check and make sure that it made correctly here. So you can see basically it's grouped out all the golfers in that morning wave. In this particular example, we're saying use at least 5 in every lineup. So, and that could be 6, that could be 4. It kind of depends on how extreme you want to go there, but really powerful tool for the weather stacking.
I like it.
So let's get back here into this build here. I know right before we got going, you mentioned that you were doing a lot in the build here. And with NFL Showdown, I know that you kind of like to do a little bit more in front. So I'm interested, like, what were you looking at here? What was interesting to you?
So, okay, we have a new tool, the PGA heat map. I manage that, and I'm a very visual person. I like to I like to see the whole field, or at least everyone that I think is relevant. And that's just kind of how I work. I like to understand where leverage is at. I like to understand, obviously where the field is going to be at, so I could, find the plays that I think that are going to be nice leverage plays. And I make tags to them. So here's what I did this week. So if we go back to step one, and I didn't change any. So I used the Saber projections. I made 2 changes, and we'll get to that. But here, so once I did all of my research and everything, I created the pool that I want. What I did is I actually just X'd out the guys that I wanted to fade. So Tom Hoagie is a fade, so I X'd him out. Billy Horschel, Keegan Bradley, Adam Scott, JJ Spawn.
Go ahead, keep going. I got you.
Okay. Siwoo Kim. We're doing this old school. I like it.
Yeah.
Will Gordon. We won't get everyone. I'll get most of the Mac Hughes. I'll get the big ones because he's popping.
Yeah.
Russell Knox, I think, was another one that kind of was getting some ownership. And then let's see, Justin Suh, Davis Thompson. Did he withdraw?
We've got him projected here, so I think.
Okay, yeah, I X'd him out. And then Ryan Armour is another one that he was kind of like, ideal course fit. And then, so go to the 6K range, and just show everyone how to X out the entire 6K range. And then what I'll do is I'll tell you which golfers to bring back.
Cool. Yeah. So
it might make it a little easier.
I think the easiest thing to do here, and let me make sure that this works correctly, is we'll grab the first one on that list and then shift-click down and then uncheck this last one here. So basically what I did, and actually I think it's because we got here. Let me let's do this again here. It's because we've got golfers that I've already unchecked in this range here. So it's
gotcha.
I'm going to just kind of do this group by group here. So we'll shift-click. Well, that's working a little weird there, but it's working good enough here. So you could also, if you wanted to group out an entire range at once and add no one back.
Nick Taylor, you can add back. Okay. He's going to be one of my guys down there.
All right. So I think we got them all here. So who's coming back in here?
So Nick Taylor, David Lingmerth, they're both 6.7K. Tyson Alexander, who's 6'3". Cole Hammer, who's 6'5". Austin Cook, who's 6'6". Chesson Hadley, who's 6'6" also. So I X'd out a lot of the 6K range. Joseph Bramlett, I have in there too.
Okay.
And then Ben Taylor.
I was going to add two here. So you saw when we ran that base build, or the GPP build, I guess, really. I turned ownership fade off just to run that to get an idea of how often people were going optimal. If you turn ownership fade back on, and especially, the default sliders, I think, are pretty aggressive with ownership fade, especially for the really large field. I think it's a good idea to trim some of your player pool, especially trim some of those guys off the bottom here, because they're projected for such low ownership that you're going to get more 6K golfers in if you're telling Sabersim you want to fade ownership aggressively, because they're projected really low owned. So if you go through and make sure that the guys in that range are actually the guys you want to play, that's when turning that ownership fade slider back on is going to have a little bit of a better result in the way that it actually builds your lineup. So I think it's a really good idea here, especially for golf.
I like it. And I'll go over my settings. We can run them, and then you can tell me if you like it or not. But all right, so here's what I did. My core or foundational type plays, you could call them, I gave bumps to, like a couple points.
Cool.
Corey Connors is one of them. So if you go up to his projection, I get a couple points. Taylor Montgomery, a couple points. KH Lee, a couple points. Cam Davis, a couple points. Keith Mitchell, a couple points. And then JT Poston, a couple points.
Cool.
So honestly, this is very similar to what I did. I think on some of like my just GPP fillers, I bumped them down a couple points, but we don't need to do that. I ran 150 and I ran it with 1,500 builds. Perfect. So then my plan and the settings I used was 7 for sim diversity and then 2 for ownership fade.
So I do like the idea of bringing the ownership fade back down a little bit here. I think for a couple reasons. One, we're already taking ownership into our own hands here a little bit by curating this player pool here, bumping some guys up, bumping some guys down, removing them, whatever. We also, in the cash build, if we go back to that real quick, you can kind of see ownership doesn't look too efficient to me this week, right? Like we're going to be getting guys here that are sub 10% owned showing up in a lot of cash builds with the Sabersim projections anyway. So I don't know if we need to intentionally fade too much ownership. So I like the idea of going to 2 there. I'm going to say, if we're building for the $5 here, I think we should bump this back up to 9. I really like that setting there. We've already, curated the player pool a little bit. You said it's a high variance event here. I like the idea of bringing that back up a little.
I must be looking at the wrong island because chat's telling us that there's a big weather edge. So, all right. So chat, I'm seeing 15. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong island, but I trust the weather I'm looking at. So I'll rerun it, but let's keep going. Let's keep it going for now.
Yeah, let's get into this here. Let's run this build here. I think it's always a good idea to kind of take an iterative approach with Sabersim as well. So we made a couple changes. We ran the base build, no changes, right? Now we make a couple changes. We introduce some ownership fade back in. Let's run another one, see how it's looking here. The last thing you want to do, I think where I see people make a lot of mistakes, especially new to Sabersim, is you go and you spend, an hour and a half here between the first build, all of your changes, and then the next build. And then you run that build and you're like, wait, this isn't what I wanted. Now you've got an hour and a half of work and research you put in, and you don't really know kind of what moved the needle, right? What thing did you do that really got those lineups from where you wanted them to not where you wanted? So by running builds like in between each kind of change, it doesn't have to be every single player you touch, but in between each kind of change, you'll have a more opportunity to fine tune and get things where you want them to be. So
all right. So I am looking at the right stuff. This is something that we can debate, but a big time weather edge, your 10 to 15 mile an hour winds, that's not an edge in PGA DFS. Maybe a slight one, but when you're talking 4 rounds, and maybe they're talking showdown. Yeah, in showdown, but you have to think about it like this. Everyone's going to be on that ownership wise. So all the ownership is going to consolidate on those early plays. We know winds change all the time in Hawaii, especially when you're talking 10 to 15 miles an hour. So if everyone's going to be stacking the PM guys, you might get the leverage that you can get on some of the early guys that still profile very well can be enough to justify a 10 to 15 mile an hour wind edge, if you want to call it that. I still view a true wind edge when you hit 20 miles an hour. That's like the most significant. And then as you go up, that's my opinion. I mean, if people want to go all in on 10 to 15 mile an hour a wind difference, then yeah, go ahead and do that. But I don't think it's that significant of an edge. So
yeah, and I think also on that note, you can kind of handle these situations differently, right? Like maybe this week, if there's 15 mile an hour winds, maybe there's some gusts in play. Maybe it's something where instead of going in and setting like a very rigid rule to say at least 4 or 5 of these guys or 6 in the better split, maybe you're just making adjustments to projections, right? You can use the tee times that way as well. As go through, find the waves where you think the weather's going to be the worst, and maybe give a couple bumps to some guys that you already kind of liked that are playing in a more favorable time, or drop some guys that maybe you were already looking at fading that are playing in the worst of the wind. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use the tee times. I think adjusting that, just because weather is kind of dynamic and a little bit hard to predict with that kind of stuff, I think it's a good idea to adjust your process based on the actual weather for that week.
Yeah, I agree. But my apology. I thought I was missing. I mean, certainly a weather edge. I mean, yeah, I agree to disagree. But all right, let's look at this. What do we get? All right. So here's the other thing, and I was able to do this in step 3. Maybe I made some different adjustments on my end. My highest owned golfer this week, I believe, is 50%. So I put a cap on all the people. So this is exactly what I did. As you are right now, I went there, and now I put a cap on 50, 50, 50 for all the guys that were popping up very high, because I wanted my core play golfers in that 40 to 50% range. And then I went down. So I ended up with a smaller pool. I think 31 golfers, but and I limited how much I was exposed to any one golfer. But it was all about then getting the combinations right, just mixing and matching. Yeah. And I was able to do it without rerunning it and it looks like you were able to do it. And that's that's why we ran 1,500 builds. Now it's bringing in.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, because now it's bringing in other builds, in there from the pool of 1,500.
Yeah.
So Bezadenhout, he was actually a guy. Actually, he's an interesting tournament play. But so here's where I added some more of like personal preference. So like Bezadenhout, I think I went in and I said to Max, okay, I only want 15% of him. I don't want 35% of Bezadenhout. So then I started adding in just only touching the max exposures. And once I had that all lined up, and then I reviewed the min exposures, and I didn't actually have to. I was really satisfied with the ownership exposure that I got. It aligned very well with my heat map, and that's kind of my goal. My goal is if I can always align it with the heat map that I'm producing, which kind of encompasses all the research that I did in a very easy to understand format, I'm going to be very satisfied as long as those ownership exposures kind of align with that. And then I'm bringing in the randomness by moving that slider up. At least that's how I see it. Right, wrong. I mean, this was like literally the process I went through. Now, there's more steps. Obviously, it took a lot more time than what we did just here, as far as planning it out. Because like I think just looking here, like Taylor Montgomery, so he would be one. So, okay, here's the other. All right, 20. Maybe I wanted him closer to 30 to 35. Mm-hmm. So what I did is instead of putting the min in there, I just bumped his projection up a little bit. So like to 75.7 or something like that. And there he bumped up that way. So I'm not, because like I don't want to over adjust in here. I want the sims, the tool that we're using in Sabersim to encompass my research and what I want, but I want it to add in, the variance, which I think is really important to hit on in PGA DFS, especially if you're trying to win, a large field tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also part of the advantage of having that sim diversity a little bit higher here as we get this very, dynamic and varied pool. Makes it very easy for us to dial in these exposures and get to the guys we want, right? If you have especially if you ended up lowering this significantly, if you were down like in the 2, 3, or 4 range, you're going to have a very rigid pool. It's going to be very hard to make those adjustments that you want to here post build. So yeah, I think this is perfect. A couple notes on my end, just from things you said here. I do like the idea. I think if you know what you want that exposure to be, right? You said 50%, boom, 50%. We go through the pool, we find 150 that are matching all your exposures, easy. If you just know that you want to get a little bit more or a little bit less of a guy, and you're not really sure exactly like how much, I think making that projection update makes some sense as well. Like maybe you're looking at Taylor Montgomery and you say, hey, I thought I was going to get a little bit more. You can just nudge that projection up another point or so, and you'll get more based on that new projection here. So, and you saw, and I think it was a really interesting example here where you can see how like fragile some of these PGA projections can be. Even just knocking him up like another 1.5 points, I think here moved him from 23% of our lineups to 33% of our lineups. So it makes a big impact changing these projections. It shows how close some of these guys are together. So definitely one of those sports where like if you've got a conviction on a guy, I think bumping him up 1 or 2 points, it's going to have a big impact on your exposures, and I think it's worth it there.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's, a way to really simplify your process. And, so you can do this. You can do something very similar to this using a lot of our content. Hoop has a player pool out. We got the cash player pool out as well. Big T has all of his golf stuff as well. I think anyone, any RPS/Saber member can easily do something very similar to this and put their own twist on it. And I think it's a plus EV overall move in doing so, and a good way to use Sabersim. Is there anything else that you would like consider thinking about or adding into like my process? I'm out more so asking just from a device standpoint. Like I feel pretty good about it, but I know there's always some things that you could bring in for me to consider for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things that come to mind. So one, I do kind of like, I mentioned it before here, I like this min uniques tool here, just as a way to get a little bit of additional diversity here, or kind of write it basically at the end of when you've done everything else here. For golf, since you're just playing 6 guys, the way I kind of think about this, and I think there's an argument against this as well. I'm not necessarily saying that this is right all the time, but even in 150, I don't know if I want to play too many lineups that are just 1v1s against another lineup that I already have, right? We want one lineup to come into first. We don't really need like a lineup to come in first and then the lineup that's just the 1v1 right off of that to come in second is the way I kind of think about it. I'd rather have like different paths to first with different lineup construction. So increasing this just to like 2 will basically make sure you don't have those 1v1s showing up in your pool. And it's not going to have a big impact here because these lineups are already diversified here, but I just like to know that kind of peace of mind thing that all 150 I'm playing here have at least 2 players different from every other lineup in the pool. So I think that can be a pretty useful tool there.
One other thing I like to do also is, so go back to step 1 and clear all the settings.
Okay.
One thing I also like to do, and this is the perfect time to do it. So all right, so the players that I'm pulling up, so Tom Kim is really getting steamed. Brian Harman got steamed hard. So just take out Tom Kim, take out Brian Harman. Corey Connors is kind of stayed. He's fine. We'll keep him. Let's see who else. I think Sung Jae is fine. So Harris English got steamed. So just X him out. And then Poston really got steamed too. Starting he was projected to be around like 9 to 11. And now is projecting to be about 15 to 18%. Take him out. And so what I'm doing here is just taking out some of the highest projected chalk and then running that same thing, just to see what the lineups look like. A very simple way to get some nice leverage on the field. And I always just like to look at what the lineups look like too. Is this something you ever do? Do you ever just take hard stands like, hey, I'm gonna just fade, not necessarily the highest projected owned guys, but the guys that got steamed the hardest, which typically end up being the highest owned.
So yeah, I think this can be pretty interesting. And in particular, I want to look at the lineup percentiles here. So we'll give this build just a second to run here. But I think there's a kind of an interesting research tactic here to kind of see, even if you take one of the most aggressive stands you can here, where you're fading a ton of the chalk, how does that affect the top end lineup percentiles here? So we'll give this a minute to build and we'll take a look there. I'll show you how to do that. There was one other thing with ownership that I wanted to show you on the other build we were working with as well. So we'll do that here in just.
I didn't want to take my guy Corey Connors out because he's the guy I think that wins this week. So we'll see.
And are you on Sung Jae? Because I noticed he's our highest guy in the pool in terms of ownership for us, but we left him in there.
Yeah, I like Sung Jae. I like Sung Jae quite a bit. Brian Harman I also like as well. It's a course that fits these guys, the ball strikers. Not a lot of distance off the tee is needed. So these shorter hitters are definitely in play.
So
Bezaden out. That's interesting. Yeah, Christian Bezaden out he's the top. I mean, he's a frustrating guy. Like really, really is. He's usually better on like tougher tracks where scoring environments are more difficult, but we have seen him from time. He's just such he's a good tournament play. He's a good large field tournament play because he's so frustrating. Doesn't typically score that well, but when he does, he's usually very, very, very low owned. So this is just another interesting way to get different, I think is fine if you're comfortable making some big stands.
Yeah, and one thing I like to do with these here, so I'm going to actually change the sorting method to a percentile. This is a lineup percentile, basically. So this is saying, this lineup as a whole, when it has its top 1% outcome, the best case scenario really for this lineup, how many points is it scoring here? And in this case, we're seeing 584.3. I think you can use that and kind of compare. Let's actually go back to our original base build here, where we didn't really make any adjustments. We didn't change ownership at all, and go compare how those percentiles look here. So 594.8, right? So basically fading like 4 of the 5 highest owned golfers in the entire field here. We're really only sacrificing about 10 points off of that top 1% outcome here, which isn't very much in golf, right? So I think it goes to show you that you can safely take stands on some of the highest owned guys in this tournament here and still build competitive lineups. If you did this exact same thing for NBA, for example, you would not have the same result, right? Fading some of the highest owned, best projected plays on an NBA slate, means you have to sacrifice a ton of projected points. It often means you have to sacrifice a ton of points off that 99th percentile as well. And it just goes to show the difference between those two sports, right? NBA, chalk's going to be a little more reliable. PGA, not so much. So I like looking at those. I think when comparing builds to each other and comparing different ideas, that's a nice kind of standardized number to look at. For what it is worth, SaberScore is always relative to a build, right? So it's grading lineups and comparing lineups within a build to each other. So you wouldn't ever want to look at one build, lineup has SaberScore 95, then look at a totally different build and see a different lineup has a SaberScore of 80 and say, oh, the lineup with 95 SaberScore is better, right? Because those are only relative to the build you're in, whereas lineup percentiles are more of kind of an absolute measurement, and you can compare between builds. So really interesting thing there.
Another thing, too, is you can look at the ownership column there, and you can see, like, it's fine. Like, Brian Harmon, he's going to be popular. Cam Davis is going to be popular. That's fine. You can play popular golfers. Find a way, though, to get some leverage into your build. Bezadenau right there, 8% projected own. Siwoo Kim in the build below it. I bet if you keep going down, you're going to, in each one of these builds, you're going to have that lower own piece in there. Is there anything people can do with the total ownership? I don't usually mess with it too much, but it was catching my eye right there just because on weeks where you do want to eat some chalk, maybe you can force those guys in there still, but put some sort of min-max or cap on total ownership as a way to force in some leverage plays.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways to do that. My favorite is to use a filter here in the actual build and to just trim some of the fat off the top with like the highest owned lineups in your pool here. So one way you can do that to just get an idea of what that line might be is we'll go back to the cash build here. And I'm actually going to sort this one by ownership, right? So I want to get an idea. What are the chalkiest cash builds that people are going to end up with? So around 123% owned, it looks like. So let's go back to this build here now. And maybe we say something like, well, let's look at what we're getting here. So 98, 109. Maybe we want to say something like if it's over 100% cumulative ownership, maybe we just want to trim it. We'll start there. So we'll add a filter here, and we're going to say we want to only show lineups where the ownership is less than, let's say 100. Yeah. And let's just see what that does, right? So you can test this out. So that basically only trashed 100 lineups from our pool, 103 lineups from our pool, which I think is actually a pretty good number here. You don't really want to be using the filters and trashing like 75 or 80% of your entire pool, right? That's a huge number. You're left with kind of just the scraps there. But trimming off the top 103 chalkiest builds in this build here and being left with 150 that we know are going to be pretty leveraged. You can see now looking at these, right? We're getting those lower owned plays in to match that chalk. Is just a good way to make sure, again, kind of once you've done your process, you've adjusted projections, built your player pool, you're just making sure that you're getting like nice balanced versions of these lineups here.
Yeah, that's would you ever put like a minimum ownership on there or just leave it be?
It's an interesting question. I think for golf in particular, where ownership is going to tend to be a little bit more efficient, I think there's an argument to saying just like you don't want to play the chalkiest lineup in your pool, maybe you also don't really want to play a lineup that's 6 guys under 5%. I think, what would be interesting here is just to see how many lineups like that we have in the pool at all. Let me see here.
Oh, sorting by the other way. So 37% is the lowest.
I mean, we have some low-owned builds in here. I mean, the Saber scores are going to be a little bit lower. The percentiles are going to be lower, so you're not going to get a ton of them in there. Maybe it is worth it. I think let's add one in here. Let me flip this back to Saber score. I think it's not a bad idea. So let's also show lineups with the ownership. Maybe let's try 70 as just kind of a rough idea here. So that trash is another. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're forcing we're forcing our lineups to eat some chalk, and then we're also forcing out the mega chalk lineups is what we're doing here.
Yeah. And I think the idea with those really low-owned lineups there is we don't have to get that different to even ship a big GPP, right? We don't need a lineup with 30% total ownership at all. So, yeah, and I think this is a good number, right? We're getting rid of a little under a third of our total lineups in the pool, not getting rid of that. I think that's the biggest mistake I see when people start experimenting with these filters is, they pull their build up and they're playing 150 lineups and they've trashed so many that they only have 200 left in the pool. You're really just picking from the scraps at that point. But I think this is a good way to use those.
Yeah, and again, like this is another we're featuring, we're highlighting the different tools, and there's so many within Sabersim right there. Because the question that I know I'll get is, what should I be doing? I think out there you should be doing whatever feels comfortable for you. It's just important to understand all the different tools and how to use them, and then use it, with our content, whatever. You could go inverse of where I'm at if you want, like as a way to get leverage off the plays I like. Maybe that's what you want to do. I mean, whatever. Like, the thing that I love about Saber is just there's so many different things that you can use with it. You can use it from a very high level. Sometimes sometimes I do that, and then sometimes I really get into it and I set a ton of rules, and I like to have, I like a filters and all of that. And it's just, for me, it depends on the week. If I feel more comfortable with the week, which I do this week, I feel like I have a good idea of what type of golfer pops here. And, it's reflected in the heat map. And so I've just transferred that data into Sabersim, and that's what helped me build my lineups, which I think over time gives me a nice edge over the field, especially like in that $5, I think it's 25K up top. One of my favorite tournaments to target just for multi-entry. And I think they have another good one is, do they have the $4 still, 20 max?
It's a $3. I think they bring that $4 in for the majors, but most weeks they have the $3, the birdie, the 20 max. I think it's a great one for people, especially to dip their toes into multi-entry stuff. And
how I would tackle that is I would just trim my pool even more. So if I have 31 golfers for 150, I don't know, maybe 20 golfers.
Yeah, and you can
20 or 18 to 20, but a similar strategy. I would just X out those golfers that were, towards the bottom ownership wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can actually, you can just change that number of lineups here to 20, and now we can kind of look at this as if it was a 20 max build.
There you go.
And you can see here, 22 golfers in the pool. We're getting the top 20 lineups from our now 1075 left in the pool here. Continue to make adjustments, that kind of thing. So, really, really powerful stuff here. I would say, for people that are maybe just trying to use Sabersim for the first time with golf this week, just some general best practices. I would recommend, doing a lot of your process in a build. If you're building 1,500 lineups and you're using that sim diversity here up at the 8, 9, 10 kind of range, I think you will be surprised at how easy it is to get lineups you like working within a build here. I think where I see people run into trouble is they're over engineering on the front end. Doing some minor things like curating the player pool, bumping up a couple guys we like we did on this show is fine. But most of the time when people run into trouble, it's they've over engineered the front end. They're trying to get the builder to work within a very narrow vision for what's going to happen. And you just don't need to do that. You can get your lineups the way you want them to be within a build very easily using some of the tools we walk through here.
Yeah, very good. We'll just about wrap this up, but any final thoughts this week, Jordan? Any up and coming stuff over at Sabersim that the people should be aware of?
Yeah, so we've been talking golf all day. We did release the new model here for the start of this season. We've actually already got some updates to it coming here in the next couple of weeks that we're really excited about here. What it will do, and maybe we'll do another show once that's live and I can talk about it a little bit more. But what it'll do is it'll better understand the actual skill differences between each individual golfer here. So we're already doing a good job of kind of creating basically, we create a power rankings of golfer skill and compare that to Vegas. And that's how we're building our sims now. But in terms of really diving in, this guy can drive the ball, right? This guy is really good around the green, that kind of stuff. The update to the model is really going to capture that in a robust way. So that's the next big push on the golf side for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the adjustments that you guys have already made. I think they're very sharp. The ownership looks to be spot on. The projections too, I think, are spot on. So just to give some transparency, our projections are more stat based. So we're trying to identify what golfer pops at each course, and they're more stats driven. Where I think so, if you're using them, they're more. So in NBA, I like to average it and just to get a baseline. In golf, I don't know if I would do that because since ours are so stat based. And your guys's are probably more so based off of the sims and the results that you're getting. So I think the method behind it may be a little bit different just keep that in mind when you're looking at our projections or Saber. I think it's a better thing to like just look at it and look at the difference between the two, and then make your own bias added points, just like we did. You know, the guys that you want to be overweight, add 2 or 3 points. The guys that you want to be underweight, X out or decrease by a couple of points. I think that's a good foundation to build off of. I just wanted to highlight the differences in the projections there, because like Tom Kim, you know, it's a huge difference from where we and I think we weight Vegas odds probably heavier than you guys do. So what I'm saying is I think there's going to be more volatility at this event. And so I like how Saber's projections look compared to ours this week, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think looking at the differences here between those two on a week-to-week basis is a really good idea. I think it could also give you an idea of where maybe some spots to look into are, right? I mean, one thing that jumps to me just doing a quick check is it looks like the RPS projections are just a little bit higher on most of the golfers here at the top, which is fine. That makes sense until you get to Jordan Spieth, right? Which is interesting, where Saber's actually a little bit over the Run Pure projection here. So it might be a guy to look into a little bit more. Maybe you're finding a basis for a fade there, or just something to dive into a little bit further. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and again, with ours being stat-based, Spieth is kind of an anomaly at times. It's like sometimes his putter is the hottest in the world, and other times he's finding the fairways better than everyone, and then other times he can't find a fairway to save his life. So I think that's the kind of, you know, the delta there that you're seeing between the two, or him relative to the others in his range. Right. I actually kind of like Spieth this week. I think he's going to make for a good tournament play. I like what I saw from him last week. But Jordan, who do you think is going to win this week? Do you have an opinion on that?
I feel like this is lame. It's the chalk take, but like Tom Kim looks unstoppable, man. Like it's pretty good. Exciting to just see like a young superstar that is, you know, I also he's a fun guy. Like he's charming. I've watched some of his interviews. I'm rooting for him now just to kind of show up and become that next young PGA superstar here. So I know he's the chalk take, best odds in the field. But I have become kind of a Tom Kim fan here. I have a lot of exposure to him in my builds as well. So I'm rooting for him this week.
I can't argue with you there. I'm on Corey Connors. Go Canada. I think Connors, the course sets up so well for him. He's actually gained one thing so Corey Connors always struggles on the green. That's like his biggest weak point is putting. Since 2018, he's gained a total of 14 strokes here putting. He's gained strokes, and every time he's teed it up here over the last or since 2018. So if he can gain strokes on the green, I think everything else in his game sets up perfectly to put himself in a position to top 5, maybe win. So Corey Connors is my guy. But we're going to leave it with that. We'll be back again next week, probably tackling, I don't know, maybe Showdown. Maybe we'll go back to one of the playoff Showdown games, or maybe we'll go back to NBA. But we'll keep switching it up like we always do. But with that, we'll keep it at that. I'm AP. That's Jordan, and I will get us out of here.